And now we go back to our top story, the story of Puerto Rico not being able to pay back its public debts. That's because we have an interview. We're going to go live to San Juan, and we go to Rafael Bernabé. He's a spokesperson for the Working People's Party there, and he was its candidate for governor in 2012. Mr. Bernabé, thanks so much for joining us. Some of us find this story, this Puerto Rico's debt story, a little bit confusing, hard to understand. So just if you could explain it for us and the significance of this latest move for the island. Is this really a default or isn't it? And how does this relate to the larger question of public debt for Puerto Rico?
Yes, as you said, this is a default, but in a sense, it's not a default. The policy of the government is in fact leading Puerto Rico to having the worst of both opportunities, both situations. The government of Puerto Rico a few weeks ago announced that the debt of Puerto Rico is unpayable and that it has to be renegotiated. Nevertheless, it has continued to pay the debt. While it did not pay the debt that was due today for the Public Finance Corporation, last Friday it paid $169 million in the debt of the Puerto Rico Development Bank. So the position of the government continues to be inconsistent. While it says that the debt is unpayable, it stops paying part of the debt. Therefore, we have the negative consequences of a default. Puerto Rico is out of the market. Puerto Rico will face lawsuits from the bondholders that have not been paid and so on. But at the same time, it continues to pay part of the debt, and those are millions of dollars that are leaving the island. We think that the government of Puerto Rico should take a much more clear stand in terms of the debt of Puerto Rico being unpayable, suspending payment, carrying out an audit of the debt so we know exactly who holds the debt right now, for one thing. As I said, we are afraid that we are having the negative consequences of the default without any of the opportunities that a default creates, which is that you can retain some of the money that you would otherwise have to pay servicing the debt.
And so what options now remain for Puerto Rico? What should Puerto Rico's government do, and what is your party, and what are you supporting?
Yes. Well, yes, we think that we have to go to the root of the problem. The fact is that the Puerto Rican economy generates a tremendous amount of wealth. There are very large multinational corporations that operate in Puerto Rico. They generate about $35 billion in profit every year that leave the island and pay very little taxes in Puerto Rico. That's one of the reasons why the government does not have money, because it does not tax these profits in Puerto Rico. That's also why we have a very high level of unemployment, because these profits leave the island. They are not reinvested in Puerto Rico. They do not create employment in Puerto Rico. So a major step that the Puerto Rico government should take is to reevaluate the tax policy regarding multinational corporations in Puerto Rico. It has to increase taxes on those corporations. There are legislators in the ruling party, in the government party, not to speak of us, who have proposed that for the longest time, but even people in the ruling party who have proposed placing a 1.5% tax on those profits. Some people have gone up as high as 10% tax on those profits. Those would generate $3, $4, $5 billion in revenue for the government. So we think that we have to revise that tax policy, and we have to reject the austerity policies that they want to impose on Puerto Rico in order to keep paying whatever has to be paid or whatever must be paid of the debt according to the bondholders.
And what's the public mood there in Puerto Rico? You know, we've been watching another story about austerity, and that was from Greece. Is there the public will there to stand up to these creditors, as we saw in Greece, or are these really different types of situations, in your opinion?
Well, I have to say that unfortunately the resistance in Puerto Rico is still rather fragmented. That is to say, the government has been able to divide working people, arguing that public employees must take pay cuts and must reduce their benefits, sacrifice themselves for Puerto Rico, which we think is an unjust policy, and it's also a counterproductive policy. The only consequence of that is increasing unemployment and further deepening the crisis, the present crisis in Puerto Rico. But there have been mobilizations by workers from the electrical system, from the aqueduct system, from teachers, university students and university workers have mobilized against the austerity measures. And we think that as the consequences of the austerity measures become more evident, more people will begin to mobilize and demand, as I said, that the tax policy regarding large corporations and the policy regarding the debt be changed. That is to say that we have a real renegotiation of that debt in which we can truly reduce what is now being paid to service that debt, and that some of the profits that now leave the island are retained in the island and reinvested in the island. The formula promoted by the government, which would be a slight alleviation in debt payments and austerity measures for workers both in the private sector and in the public sector, would only deepen the economic crisis. This is what was done in Greece in 2010 and again in 2012, combining limited debt relief with austerity measures, and the consequences of that were a deepening of the crisis in Greece, and the same recipe will have the same consequences in Puerto Rico. So this is what we have to resist and reject.
All right, Rafael Bernabé, he is a spokesman for the Working People's Party there in Puerto Rico, and was also a former gubernatorial candidate there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.